Well, you are in for a treat today on Sukkot. Our guest is Benji Cohn. Ben, you're a native of Greensboro, and I was hoping that today, in a brief conversation, you could take us through something that could probably take a semester long, which would be your family's connection to the United States and to this area in particular. I'm sure you got a great story to tell us today.
Well, it's a long story, and I'll be fairly brief and outline it so I can talk about something else that interests me, my personal trip to Judaism.
Sure.
It started, my great-grandfather came from Bavaria, Germany, and I forget whether it's 1817 when he was 16 years old or 1816 when he was 1817. But either way, started as a traveling salesman, very typical German story, and found a growing town in the mountains of Tennessee called Jonesboro, Tennessee, where he settled down and created a little retail store, which was quite successful, but he made a bad choice. Tennessee was a dual loyalty state in the Civil War, and he picked his loyalty with the South. He was a loyal Southerner in Jonesboro, and after the Civil War, that came to haunt him because the sheriff came in and said, "You have a new partner in the store, me," under the carpetbagger. He didn't like that. The partnership didn't work out. So he packed his bags and moved to the northernmost southern city. Maryland was a dual loyalty state. So he moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and because he wouldn't go to New York, that was too Yankee, and reestablished a business more in a wholesale operation that supplied the type of store he owned in Jonesboro because he knew what the store needed. That business was very successful, and his children, my grandfather and his brother Moses, were salesmen for that wholesale operation. Now, just as an aside, the confusion in Greensboro for the Cohn family tree is Moses and Caesar, the two founding fathers of Cohn Mills, were two of 13 siblings. So relationships now in my generation get very complex in Greensboro. So basically, Moses and Caesar, by traveling the South, saw that textiles was growing and persuaded their father to basically liquidate, close up the wholesale operation, and invest in textile business. So in 1891, founded Cohn Mills Export and Commission Company. There's a long story about how that happened. We won't go into it. But as luck has it, there was a nice German Jewish guy, tailor with one sewing machine in California that needed a tough fabric for the ranchers and farmers and miners in California. And the Cohn brothers decided to supply this guy in California with denim on credit. And of course, that became the goose that laid the golden egg, as we say, because that German Jewish tailor was Levi Strauss, founder of Levi Jeans. So Cohn Mills became the world's largest denim manufacturer, and at one point had 19 mills throughout the South. But they established in Greensboro the textile operation in 1891. So the Cohns have been here for a long time. And what's interesting about Greensboro compared to other southern towns, not because of me, but because at one time, Cohn Mills was the largest employer in Greensboro by far. Right. The Cohns were known to be extremely generous in all ways to the town of Greensboro. And because of that, Greensboro never had the classic anti-Semitism of other towns. Some of it was there, but it was not bad. Now that's in 3 minutes. I could have spent an hour on, but it's an outline. Now I'm going to move me. Again, if you look at this family from my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, they were Jewish in the very classic German Jewish Reform manner, much more peoplehood-oriented than religious. Mm-hmm. And in fact, my father, to my knowledge, never went to any services at Temple Emanuel, either High Holy Days or anything. But he was the leader of a bond drive for Israel. I have a picture my farm, or my father would go to my ear when he was on a trip to Israel, looking at developing textiles in Israel or advising them on the textile industry. So there's always been in the family a strong Jewish peoplehood connection, not religious connection. Let's put it that way. One side story I'll tell that side story later. Anyway, so my mother was not Jewish, she was Episcopalian. My father was Jewish because he was so secular oriented, they agreed that all children would be raised Christian by my mother.
Right.
And I firmly believe with children, some religious education is better than none.
I agree with you.
Totally. So I was baptized, I was an acolyte and carried the cross down the aisle at Holy Trinity Church, learned to light the candles from the inside out, snuff them from the outside in, and the dance you do at communion with wine and all that stuff. That's the way I grew up. So, as happens in human nature at Chapel Hill, I fall in love with the girl of my life, and we get married, and
that's Betty.
That's my wife, Betty.
Right.
We've been married 54 years
Amazing.
now. And 2 years into the marriage, I'm up at Harvard Business School and said, Betty, I think when I get back to Greensboro, I'm going to convert to Judaism, which drew total shock in her, gulp, and said, what will that do to our marriage? And I said, well, my parents were able to handle it. I think we can. Now, a side note of that. Consequently, I felt that I had no right to demand, negotiate, or even ask to raise my kids Jewish. Because it was a conversion after the marriage, not before the marriage.
Right.
That is a decision I made without telling Betty, so it was never debated. And that I deeply regret now. But, c'est la vie, life goes on. Now everyone asks, well, why that sudden in 1967 at Harvard Business School do you decide to convert? Well, let me say there was many factors. It starts with at Chapel Hill, and everyone's heard this story, but so I'm repeating it. In Chapel Hill, my best friend and a fellow acolyte in Holy Trinity, like college kids do, we get a couple of girls that go to his father's mountain house in a Roaring Gap, in a resort up in the mountains called Roaring Gap.
Right.
Which, by the way, is a Winston-Salem organized, controlled, and run lovely, exclusive resort up there. And we did our thing, which we do, and then we decided, John and I, that we wanted to play golf on the golf course. We let the girls sleep in. We went and played golf on Sunday. On Monday, his father got the classic phone call. Did not have Ben coming back to Roaring Gap. You know the rules. No Jews allowed.
Amazing.
It's the first hit of anti-Semitism I got. Certainly not life-threatening, not anything,
right.
but it started that questioning, who am I?
Right.
What am I? The second factor in this was great admiration of my father. He was a mensch in every way you can describe a mensch. So admiration there. Secondly, there was this famous letter of the Cones, that part of it was about being charitable and being changer. But there was a second part of that letter, which too many Cones ignored, about maintaining your faith.
Right.
That got me interested. And then as I got questioning, I kept asking myself every time I was in church, what is it in Christianity that allowed the Holocaust? What is it? And of course, no one answered. Christians avoid the question, but it glared at me like a thing. So all of that's rolling through my mind.
Right.
I'm at Harvard Business School with my new bride. I'm a Vietnam veteran.
Right.
In '67, the Six-Day War occurs.
That's what I wanted to ask. If that had something to do with this also.
That was the drop that went over the dam. It wasn't a major factor, but it was the tipping point, as I call it. And that's when I said to Betty, I think I'm converting to Judaism. and got home and studied with Arnold Task for a year.
Right.
And became Jewish. And here's a funny side story. After studying for a year, I didn't go through a Beit Din. I didn't have a naming ceremony. I didn't have all of the, I don't know if male converts do the mikveh or not in conversion. I'm not sure. Did not do a mikveh. But Arnie said, well, Reform accepts patrilineal descent. We always considered you Jewish. And while I had you for a year, I thought you should learn something. So I didn't have any of the ritual climax of my year of study. And then I became a Jew in the image of my father.
Right.
Which services, sideline fun story I always tell is, shortly after conversion, Betty and I had been invited to several different families' homes for Seders. Passover Seders. And I decided, Betty comes to me after doing the 2 or 3 up, she says, we should start having our own Seder. And I said, wonderful, and we'll invite my parents and her parents, and we'll have a nice family Seder and explain all that. So I called my father and told him we were doing it, and I asked him to be the leader. And his response is classic. He says, I'm honored to be asked, but I don't feel capable. I've never been to a Seder. Here I am, 30 years old or something, and yet my father's never been to a Seder.
Yeah, when you told me that story, and so what happened that night?
He loved it. He loved it. That became a family tradition for about 10 years, and he came, but he never was the leader. I was always.
You were always taking care of it.
I was, and of course, Arnold Task, the rabbi, went to great help in narrowing it down to something palatable in time to Gentiles and 6 and 8 years old kids. And
Sure.
So we did the essence without great detail.
And that's something that your kids grew up with, that your family grew up with.
The change occurred. My cousin James Levy's son Edward was being bar mitzvah, and he was a brilliant kid, Phi Beta Kappa at Chapel Hill, but he had a speech defect. And we decided at age 13 it would be very difficult for him to be the lead, to do a full bar mitzvah with as much reading. So Jane had never had a bat mitzvah. They didn't do that when she was growing up before. And of course, my conversion in the 20s, I'd never had a bar mitzvah. So we decided to have a family b'nai mitzvah.
I love it.
So suddenly I'm going to class learning my alphabet, Gimel Dalets, beginning to read, and then going to a lot of services so I could sight read. And suddenly I'm learning a Torah portion with Andy Broad. The saints were putting up with me. And that got me at age, let me see, how old was I? 56 or 57. Got me interested in the religious side of Judaism. So we had the B'nai Mitzvah, and I read that Torah, and it moved me in a way I'd never been moved. And since then, I've become much more religious. And I jokingly say there are 3 times in your life where people are religious. And Andy will probably roll his eyes at this story, but the first time you're religious is when you're cramming it down your kid's throat. And they can smell hypocrisy a mile away. So you better be religious while your kids are growing up. Then you drop out in college and early career. Suddenly you've got kids of your own in the Lador Vador tradition, and you start cramming it down your kid's throat, and they smell. So you become religious. And then the third time is when I got religious, is your hair starts getting gray, arthritis begins to set in, and you begin to feel your age and your mortality, I guess. And I guess that's where I am now.
I've always felt that we're really good at taking some of the big picture Jewish stuff and making it make sense for little kids. But at times we tend to make it a little bit too, at times we tend to make it simple, and then you walk around thinking this is all that there is. But that this is an incredible tool for us when we're in those phases of our life where we're confronting who we really are.
Incredible, because it does not force you to believe anything crazy. It's more of a guideline of what to do and how to do it. And the doing imports the meaning to me. Whereas I try to say meaning creates doing, Judaism is doing creates the meaning, I guess, is the way I put it.
Now, Ben, you've had good relations with the rabbis here at Temple Emanuel. I mean, you and I have spent time together. You've been close with Rabbi Gutman. You were close to Rabbi Task.
Yeah, well, every rabbi is different, and no rabbi is perfect. And if you're aware of that, then it's easy. Let's put it that way. Don't worry about the negatives. No one's perfect. Each rabbi in their own way was perfect. And the classic example of that is, and maybe you don't want to go there, is my story and my version of the Arnold Task Must Go dispute in the Temple.
Which was way before my time.
Before Fred Gutman's time,
Sure.
And Harvey and Seligman. And the way I saw it was, can I talk about this or what? Go for it. Arnold Task was without a doubt one of the nicest, sweetest, kindest men I've known in all respects. He was exactly what my father and my uncle and old Greensboro wanted in a rabbi, which was a respected, perfect spokesman of Judaism to the non-Jewish audience of Greensboro. At that, he excelled, and my father, who never went to services anyway, or never went to studies, all they wanted. Problem came that the younger generation found this wonderful, sweet man not exciting, not invigorating, not getting their teenage children rah, 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 hoop to hoop to hoop. So you had a generational conflict that I saw as human nature, but it, like all what I call internal Jewish wars, it was pretty bloody. I jokingly say at Temple Emanuel, if we have a major dispute, stay in Greensboro, leave, rabbi dispute, how much Hebrew and the thing, we have to fight like hell. At the end of the fight, we have to heal somehow, and that's the hard part. If you're a Christian and a fight develops in your congregation, you can always walk with your feet, because there's 6 Episcopal churches, there are 10 Presbyterian churches. You just go somewhere else and avoid the fight. We don't have that luxury, therefore we fight harder, we fight with greater vigor, and most of the times we heal.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that moment of deciding where Temple Emanuel, where its next step would be, and some of the healing after that.
Well, I'll just tell you some of the side things. I'm not sure it's completely healed, sadly. But some of the side stories, one of the funniest side stories, I don't want to mention, I want to tell you I saw that dispute also as generational. The only 2 old family Greensboroers that Shaw thought we should move was Joan Bleedenthal, of blessed memory, and me. Every other cone felt we should stay downtown. I think Tom Sloan wanted to move, too. He was the leader of the go. But everyone else felt we should stay. So I saw that very similar to the Arnold. There was this concept of, we grew up here, we're downtown congregation, everyone would pull out and show the Star of David in the First Pres Church of Linda, and how important it was to be close to Holy Trinity, and so there were great emotional arguments from the older side. The problem was it would have cost a heck of a lot more to stay downtown. And I'm convinced the Temple made the right move. Just had lunch with my cousin Ed Cohn, who's convinced we made the wrong move still, but we're still friends. So that dispute was also generational, very similar to the Arnold Task dispute as I saw it. 2 funny side stories to that, which I've got to tell. Person not be named called my wife before the big vote, reminded her that I've been paying more than family dues. And of course, Betty saved the Carolina Theater and has been involved in downtown Greensboro and is a preservationist at heart. They called Betty and reminded her that under the bylaws, since I've been paying family dues, they felt she had a right to vote. Please come cancel my vote out. That's how close the votes became. Another typical, that I find very funny story, an elderly lady, not to be mentioned at one of the meetings, came up to me and figuring that I was a cone and was on the state, what I call the state side mistake. Comes to me and said, Ben, you know, I don't feel welcome at Temple Emanuel any longer. And I got out of the car and I said, you don't? Why? And she said, there's too much Hebrew in the service.
Right.
My response was, she thought I'd say, oh, that's awful, I agree with you. My response was, well, you know, they give free Hebrew classes twice a year, and that was not the answer she wanted to hear.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, those are the funny sidelines of the story, but I think those disputes, though, listen, a religion that does not change over time will die, in my opinion. But change comes slowly. If change comes too fast, that's not good. So change comes slowly with a lot of tears and a lot of argument. But that's what Jews do, is we argue, so it's not too bad.
Right. You know, we find a way to have the conversation,
That's
you know, and if it's an argument, we find a way to have it. And God willing, it should be respectful.
In fact, someone who was converting, and I kind of like being a mentor to convertees.
Yeah, no, you've done a great job with that over there.
As a convertee, one convertee came to me and said, when do I know I'm ready to convert? And I laughed and I said, when you tell the rabbi he's nuts, then you're ready to convert.
So listen, you gave me some advice, and I want you to tell the full story, because I think you've shared this advice also to rabbis who are coming to Greensboro.
Yeah, Libby hadn't gotten it yet, but she will.
Right. But give the full range of the story, because you shared this also with Rabbi Gutman.
Yeah. When Andy came to Greensboro, I said, my wife's Methodist, and the Methodists do one thing right. A voice on high, or their hierarchy, picks what minister goes to what church, and they stay there 6 or 7 years, and they move on. So I recommend Annie just come here, that you stay in Greensboro 6 or 7 years as an assistant rabbi. Learn all you can from Fred, learn everything, absorb, but then you need to get out of Greensboro and go be the head rabbi of a smaller congregation, so you know what it's like to be the ultimate boss. Then you're ready to come back to Greensboro as our senior rabbi. You see how that advice worked out.
Right. I'm now in year number 19, and I'm the senior rabbi. Right.
And without that interim step, and
Right.
I kind of said the same thing to Fred Gutman, and Fred said to me, well, that's one way to look at it. The other way is, I want to be at your grandchild's bris, be at your grandchild's bar bat mitzvah, marry your children or grandchildren, and bury you. In other words, I want to be a congregational family rabbi. And my response is, that's another way to look at it.
All right, look, in our last minute here, what things do you want to say, about your time here with Temple Emanuel, and just any general reflections as we're in Sukkot now?
But to all of you secular Jews in the image of my father and my uncle and my family, you're missing out on a lot. That's all I can say.
That's amazing, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time and just for everything. Our friendship means the world.
You didn't ask me any questions, though. I didn't give you a chance.
Look, the nature of this is to have a conversation.
Right.
And just really grateful.